Hello, friends. My name is Evelyn Joy, and just like the title says, this video is going to be about my 3 very different experiences with cesareans, also known as C-sections. I'm making this video to share with people who might be curious about what experiencing a C-section is like, for people who maybe are recovering from a C-section, for people who maybe just like story times with Evelyn. So this is my narrative. I'm going to be talking about TMI things, too much information, because anytime you talk about childbirth, there's going to be too much information. TMI. So if you get squeamish, now is your opportunity to exit, because cesareans are major abdominal surgery. Now, if you've ever heard someone say that, oh, just have a C-section, it's the easy way out, or, oh, you had a C-section, you didn't have a real birth, or whatever people say, that's only said by people who are A, not a doctor, or B, have never had a C-section, because the reality of the situation is cesarean is a form of birth, and cesarean is major abdominal surgery, and recovering from it felt like, to me, all 3 times like coming back from the dead. So what do I mean by that? Let's dive in. With my first daughter, Esther, I had planned out having a natural birth in a birthing center with a midwife. I was visiting the midwife, and as I started to see that with possible complications, I might end up having to have a hospital birth after all. And why was I paying out of pocket when Medicaid would pay for a doctor and I was paying out of pocket for the midwife? So as I started to see that I was starting to have, high blood pressure issues and things, I went ahead and switched over to a doctor that was suggested by my midwife. So the doctor was aware that I wanted more natural methods and stuff of giving birth. Welcome, Amanda. So as it turns out, I ended up having to do several 24-hour urine collections so that they could check the protein in my urine. And I was diagnosed with gestational hypertension, which means if just once in your pregnancy you have a really high blood pressure reading, then you have gestational hypertension, which makes you at risk for developing preeclampsia, because high blood pressure turns into preeclampsia. It affects the way that your kidneys process the protein, and so protein begins to appear in your urine when they test the urine. So they make you, take a 24-hour urine collection so that they can see over 24 hours how much protein is in the urine and do tests and stuff. So that's a lot of fun. So basically with Esther, when I went to my 36 and a half, it was almost 37 weeks. I was 36 weeks and 6 days appointment. I mentioned that the day before I was feeling less of my daughter moving, and they did a sonogram and stuff, and they thought that maybe I was potentially leaking a small amount of fluid. So the doctor said, with the gestational hypertension that was borderline turning into preeclampsia, and with me being, 1 day away from being 37 weeks, which is full term, and, with the possibility of the baby wasn't moving as much, and possibly I was maybe leaking some of my waters just a little bit, then he sent me in for induction. So the good news was I was like 1 centimeter dilated. So that gave us hope and she was head down. So that gave us hope that I would probably, with Pitocin, I would progress. So they did this thing where they put like a little half pill up behind your cervix, and checking your dilation when your baby is still up high and not low. They have to, again, very TMI. Now's your chance to exit, they have to stick a gloved hand, me totally ignorant of this in my first healthy pregnancy. They stick a gloved hand up into your vagina, up, and it feels like almost to the elbow, to check your cervix and stick that little pill back there. So that was very extremely painful. Hi, Candy. This is going to be way too much TMI, but welcome. So, Candy Addicted, you just won a contest on Teacher Dani's video, so you better go check that out. You won a drawing, so she's going to send you some stuff, so get in contact with her. Anyway, you can comment on her video and she'll email you. So you won the drawing. Congratulations. Anyway, totally off topic. So, long story short, as the hours progressed, you know, they had to put another one of those little half pills up there to help with contractions and stuff. Then later they hooked me up to Pitocin through the IV, and 36 hours into labor, it was really uncomfortable because they made me stay on my back in the hospital bed. So for someone who was hoping for a natural birth, this was pretty disappointing for me that they were forcing me to lay on my back. But I understood that because of my size and everything, they weren't able to monitor the baby's heart rate in any other position. So I was in a lot of pain because when you lay on your back and you have a big baby in your tummy, your back hurts a lot. So my back was hurting, but that back pain was causing some natural contractions. So that can happen sometimes. So anyway, it got really excruciating. You're supposed to not scream when you're in labor. And by 36 hours of labor, I was screaming, and I had a really mean nurse that was completely unsympathetic. She came in and she told me, you're harming your baby and you're not supposed to scream. You're supposed to moan or whatever. Your baby needs to get enough oxygen. So I'm like, you know, what you going to do about it? Like, give me some painkillers, something. So she left the room and she came back and she said, okay, we're going to give you the epidural. I'm like, finally, after 36 hours of labor, I finally get an epidural. But again, it was 1 to 2 centimeters, almost no dilation change in all of that pain. So this mean lady got me my epidural. And the doctor who put in the epidural ended up being like my guardian angel in the next hour. So he put in the epidural and he stuck around, and this mean nurse raised my Pitocin levels, and immediately my heart rate, my baby's heart rate plummeted to undetectable. And so they turned off the machines, disconnected me from the Pitocin. A ton of nurses rushed in, and they said, we need to get her onto another bed that has wheels on it for the operation room. We need to take her in for an emergency C-section. The baby's heart rate dropped to undetectable. So I feel like it was that nurse's fault, but obviously they're not going to blame her or take responsibility for that. So I never, proceeded with legal action or anything, because what would I do? Anyway, so they rushed me in to have an emergency C-section. And the nurses are running around like crazy because there's only one doctor present that does C-sections, and he's in a C-section right now. He's doing surgery. And my doctor was at home like a couple cities away. And this is like 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. So they called my doctor to see if he can get here. And they're like rushing around worried. And I just had, I don't know if it was partly because of the, I don't know if it was partly because of the epidural. I don't know if epidural gives you a calming effect, but I really feel like it was the Holy Spirit. I just had a sense of peace and calm. And even though everyone was freaking out and thinking that, the baby could pass, I felt at peace, and I started singing, like quietly singing some songs to the Lord. And I just was believing that God's got my baby in his hands, you know? He's got the whole world in his hands. Might have been one of the ones I was singing. So I was a little bit out of it because I'd been in labor for 36 hours and I just had the epidural and stuff. But all these nurses are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, worried. And I just felt a sense of peace and calm. And the only person that was talking to me was the epidural doctor, whatever you call him. I'm sure he has a specific long title that starts with an A. I think, I don't remember. Anesthesiologist. I think anesthesiologist. Anyway, he was standing next to me. They made me drink this yucky drink that I guess is supposed to prevent you from throwing up, but it was so disgusting that I threw up. Oh, and during those 36 hours, I wasn't allowed to eat or drink anything, and I was hardly allowed any like ice chips at all because they didn't want me to have too many ice chips because then I would have like water in my stomach, heaven forbid, and I could throw up. But then they give me this nasty drink and I threw it up. And I'm like, do I have to drink it? I asked the guy, the anesthesiologist, I said, do I have to drink it again? And he said, no, you're good. So my doctor appeared. He was like 2 cities away. How'd he get here so quickly? I didn't find out until my checkup a week later. I asked the doctor, how'd you get there so quickly? He was driving. He happened to be awake, you know, in the middle of the night when he got the phone call. He got in his car immediately. He was driving like over 100 miles per hour on the highway to get to the hospital in time. So he was also another angel that came. And so they put up the curtain and they tried to get the baby out as quickly as possible. This is an important factor in how an emergency C-section is very different from a planned, scheduled C-section. So an emergency C-section, they want to get the baby out as quickly as possible. The baby's life is potentially in danger. They're not so concerned about where exactly they're cutting as far as how it'll affect the mother. So I found this out a week later at my checkup when I said, you know, I've lost feeling around that area. I don't really, you know, if I touch, you know, I don't feel on the skin in that area. I don't have feeling there. And he said, yours was an emergency C-section. And so it was not a cosmetic surgery. We were more concerned about the life of the baby than where we were cutting. So we potentially cut some nerves and you may have lost feeling for the rest of your life or temporarily in that area. So sorry, but your baby's out, you know? So that's how an emergency C-section is different than a scheduled C-section. Scheduled C-section, they can take their time. They can be careful where they're cutting and everything. So a little bit different. Anyway, and I'm fine with that. Losing feeling in that area honestly isn't the worst thing that ever happened to me because I've heard of some women that had to have an emergency C-section and they hadn't had time to get the epidural and they had to get the baby out and they felt everything. That happens to some women. They have very traumatic births. So there was a curtain up. I couldn't see them cutting me, so that's nice. I was awake. Some women are asleep, some are not. They told me, you can go to sleep if you want to, but I was very eager to see my baby, make sure my baby was okay. So I was forcing myself to stay awake, even though I was feeling drained after 36 hours of labor. And, you know, I was under anesthesia with the epidural. So I was feeling very drowsy. So what do you feel? When you have effective numbing, I couldn't feel from the waist down, but what I did feel was a lot of pushing, like pushing and shoving and pushing, because they have to do a lot of pushing on your stomach. So I felt myself getting pushed around a lot, but I just trusted that the doctors and nurses know what they're doing, right? So I was being shoved in the stomach a lot, and that's to get the baby out, because again, okay, so they cut you about, for me anyway, they cut me about the length of this. And again, this is TMI. Do you want to know where? You want to know where they cut? They cut right here. Well, actually, right here. So it's just above your bikini line, basically, and below your stomach. So it's about, you know, this much. So, but again, I'm going to talk about this length. With both my first two, it was this length. With my third, who was my biggest baby, it was a shorter length because it was a better doctor. So I'll talk about that. So it was about this length, almost exactly, the scar. So they got my baby out. I was waiting to hear her cry. And I've heard in stories that if a baby's not breathing, sometimes, I'll turn my fan on. Sometimes if a baby hears a familiar voice, like their mother or their father, they might take that gasp of breath, right? So I was just talking. The room's got nurses that are ignoring me, and I can't even see my baby, but they said my baby's out. I didn't hear her yet, but I'm like, welcome to the world, Esther. I'm so excited to meet you. Hey, baby. Mommy's here. It's okay. Then when I heard her cry, I started saying, oh, what a beautiful cry you have. I will never, ever, ever be annoyed by your cry. You can cry as much as you want to, sweetheart. Welcome to the world. I'm so happy to hear you. I just kept talking to her because I knew that familiar voice in an unfamiliar world could possibly help her to begin to breathe and begin to calm, right? So I had requested skin to skin. This hospital did skin to skin. After they cleaned her up and, cut the umbilical cord and everything. Also, my husband, because it was an emergency C-section, my husband wasn't allowed in the room because they weren't sure what condition the baby was coming out in. Again, her heart rate had plummeted to undetectable. But when she came out healthy. She came out with a normal heart rate. And so we don't know what happens. The doctor said, oh, maybe it's just because you're overweight that they lost the detection on the heart. I don't think so. I think it was a miracle. I think it was the Lord. I think God had his hand on it. Doctors can try to explain it away, but it was a miracle. So she's my miracle baby. I'm so thankful she's alive. I was fine with having a C-section if that means not having a stillbirth, right? So they put her on my chest for literally less than a minute. And I was like, oh, she's so beautiful. And I was forcing myself to stay awake because, again, my body is so drained. I'd been in labor for 36 hours. I had gone through so much pain, and my body had just gone through major abdominal surgery. Again, not the easy way out. Major abdominal surgery. So I was like, oh, I love you, and then they took her off my chest. She was just on my chest like less than a minute. And so I saw that she was okay. And then I knocked out. I knocked out completely. I was dead to the world, not for real, but I was gone. I knocked out for like 3 hours. So when I woke up, I was in a room. I was in one of those wheel beds or whatever. I was in a room that had 2 nurses, and it was 3 hours later after my cesarean. And the 2 nurses were at a computer just talking to each other and on the computer. And I was shivering. I was shivering so cold. Like I thought I was cold. But it turns out that shivering is an after effect of major surgery or giving birth, even natural birth. Some people experience shivering. So I was shivering all over. So I thought I was cold, but my body was reacting, to what I'd gone through. So I told the nurses, I'm cold, so they got like a heated blanket and put it on me. So that helped a lot and helped me calm down. Again, these 2 nurses, I don't want to say they were rude, but they were ignoring me. And I felt like, where's my husband and where's my baby? Oh, my husband was allowed to come in the room once the baby was cleaned off. So he was able to hold the baby after the baby Esther had been on my chest. And so then he was allowed to hold the baby. But my husband was nowhere to be found. My baby was not in the room. And there's just these 2 nurses ignoring me. And I'm just like, this is not how I envisioned birth being, So all the videos and stories of birth being this beautiful, amazing thing just isn't always that way when you have a C-section, right? I'm sorry I'm ignoring the chat box. I'm trying to keep the flow of the story going. So after a little bit, the ladies, did talk to me, and I said, where's my baby? Where's my husband? They said, oh, we took your baby back to the wherever they take care of the babies, the nursery, not in ICU. She was fine. Nursery or whatever. And we don't know where your husband is. He's probably back at your hospital room or whatever. So they start wheeling my bed over to where my hospital room was, and my bags are in there, but my husband's not. And we're kind of like, where's my husband? So there's the laboring room, and this hospital had a separate room for recovery. So we were trying to find my husband before I went to the recovery room. So then we find him. He was with Esther, and they didn't allow me to see my baby or be with my baby for no apparent reason. They told me I couldn't see her for 3 more hours. So I woke up 3 hours after my cesarean. They didn't let me see her for 3 more hours. They said, no, it's protocol that you can't see the baby until 6 hours after your surgery. I'm like, what? Where was that in the birth plan? You know what I mean? So I'm feeling like there's something wrong with the baby and they're not telling me about it. So I was so thankful for my husband because he took photos and videos that just calmed my mommy worried heart. So my husband and I, we hung out in the recovery room, which had like a big bed, so that it was like so big that it was made so that a partner could lay with you, which was really cool. A lot of hospitals don't have that, but it was nice because I could like put my backpack and bags on there too. Anyway, so he showed me these videos and photos that he was with her. I don't do the vaccination shot in the hospital. I don't get vaccinations for my babies till they're bigger. I spread out vaccinations and delay them. But she had the vitamin K shot, and he was there for that, and there for when they took her temperature and stuff, and she was crying, and he was comforting her and talking to her. And again, his voice is familiar to her, so she was calming down because she was hearing Daddy's voice. So I was so touched that I married a good man, that even when I'm knocked out after surgery, he's by our child's side. I was really touched by that. Also, he was texting and contacting and Facebooking and letting people know she's going into surgery right now. Please be praying. And it went well and the baby's okay. And he was sharing videos and photos on Facebook already so that people would know that we're praying, that like, praise God, she's okay. So I was so touched by that, and the videos really calmed my heart. And so it wasn't until 6 hours after that I got to have my daughter Esther with me. That's about all I'm going to talk about with that cesarean, except for I will talk about recovery. So the doctors in my IV gave me some magnesium, which is partly because I had like preeclampsia, and it was just to help me kind of rejuvenate me after the cesarean. I had a catheter in, so I didn't go to the bathroom and I didn't get up. So I didn't know how much pain I would experience with walking until the nurse said, okay, we took your catheter out. Now we're going to get you up and we're going to help you walk to the bathroom. And I'm like, what? I can't walk? Like, nobody told me that after major abdominal surgery, you need assistance walking. What? You need assistance? I'm like, I can't stand up? What are you talking about? I need 2 people to help me walk to the restroom? The restroom's literally 10 feet away. I can't walk there by myself. And as I started to try to sit up, oh, that's why. And that's when I felt the pain. That was like, oh my, this is going to be a long road to recovery. They say it takes 6 weeks to recover from any kind of childbirth. And as I tried to stand up, I was suddenly an 85-year-old woman who the straightest I could stand up was way hunched over like this, because this part of my body, all of the muscles, all of the tendons that had been, you know, affected by this surgery, moved out of the way to get the baby out or whatever, all of that needed to recover. And suddenly my body doesn't want me to walk. But the best thing for your body after surgery is to get moving and to walk. And the longer you wait, the worse it is once you start moving. And so since it had been over a day since my cesarean, when I finally walked, I needed to get up and moving. And the more you walk, the better you feel, even though it's excruciating. So they give you narcotics, which my experience, all 3 cesareans, they gave me a full bottle of opioids. And I chose all 3 times, not because I'm a hero or anything, but all 3 times I chose to use extra strength Tylenol and throw the opioids away. You don't have to do that if you have a C-section, but I'm going to do it again this time. Extra strength Tylenol was enough for me personally, and I just didn't want to run the risk of, you know, having opioids in my system and getting addicted. I did take it a little bit in the hospital each time just to get used to it, but after that I just took extra strength Tylenol, I think once every 6 hours, something like that. And if you don't take the painkiller, you feel it at about hour 6 or 7. If you forget to take your painkiller, your body will let you know. Oh yeah, by the way, you're going to feel like death if you don't take some sort of painkiller. So anyway, slowly but surely in the hospital, I learned to breastfeed and I learned to walk again. And that's how that went. With my second baby, Deborah Faith, I was monitoring my blood pressure at home. My blood pressure had been fine all of pregnancy. And then suddenly at 36 weeks, my blood pressure was reading like extremely low and then extremely high. And I was thinking, this machine has got to be wrong. It's got to be wrong. It's got to be having some sort of problem with it. I don't know what's wrong with this machine. So I called my doctor and I said, look, these are the numbers I'm seeing. I don't know. And they said, just to be safe, we want you to go in and get checked in at the hospital and have them check your blood pressure. So when I got checked in at the hospital, they took blood sample, urine sample. They checked my blood pressure. It was high. And a couple hours later, they told me, you have preeclampsia and you have to stay overnight here. And I had to stay the night there. I had been doing the 24-hour urine sample. I was in the middle of it at that point and stuff because I was starting to show signs of preeclampsia. So it turned out diagnosed with preeclampsia right before hitting 37 weeks. So it was literally a couple days before full term. So also my baby was breech. She had been breech for a while, like a couple months, and she hadn't turned. And I'd been doing all the exercises and things online that they tell you that you should do to get your baby to flip, but she was drop down breech, bottom down in my pelvic bone, not interested in moving. And the doctors also came in to see her position and see if there was a way they could get her to flip. And they said, we're not able to move her, and you need to have this baby at 37 weeks because preeclampsia, the only the only cure for preeclampsia is childbirth. And preeclampsia can get really dangerous if it develops into eclampsia and HELLP syndrome. There have been women who have died or had brain damage because of seizures and stuff. So anyway, all that to say, they were going to make me stay overnight for like 3 days until I reached 37 weeks. But they decided after monitoring me to let me go home, stay the night at home one night, and then come 1 or 2 nights, and then come in the morning for my scheduled C-section. So I came in for my scheduled C-section. It was really special because I got to pray with the doctors and nurses. I requested it. the doctor and nurses came into my room, and I said, hey, is it okay with you guys if I pray with you all beforehand? And they were like, yeah, we love that. So I was really blessed that several of my nurses and doctor were Christians, and the people that were there were okay with me praying. So, and my husband was there with me while we were waiting for surgery time. Several hours passed because my surgery was delayed. And my husband and I were just singing praises to God in Spanish. And yeah, so when I had my C-section, I have two problems with how it was handled. Number one, that hospital didn't believe in skin to skin, which can help the baby get back to breathing naturally. And number two, because I was never induced and I never labored, the labor can also help the baby's lungs to develop. And number three, if there's a possibility the baby's lungs aren't developed, a lot of times, before 37 weeks, they'll give you a steroid shot to help the baby. So anyway, long story short, when they did cut me open and get Deborah out, my husband was allowed to be in the room because it wasn't an emergency C-section. He had shower cap and hospital gown and gloves and everything, just like everybody else. And when you have a C-section, you have a shower curtain on. You have a shower curtain dividing so you don't see the operation. I was awake for the operation again. I did not have an epidural this time. I had a spinal tap, and I'll talk about how that affected me differently than the epidural. So a spinal tap is similar to the epidural. It's given to you similarly. It's also a shot in your back, but it affected me differently. All that to say, when she came out, my husband was allowed to hold her up so I could see her, but they never did skin to skin. And they told me, we're monitoring her breathing and it's a little bit weird. Her breathing's not where we want it to be, so we have to take her to NICU. So they whisked her away from me. I only saw her for a minute or two. But this time, I hadn't labored for 36 hours. I wasn't totally out of it. So I was awake after my surgery, after they sewed me up and finished everything. And so I was like, I want to see my baby. So when they were taking me to my recovery room, they wheeled me in the hospital bed into the NICU, and I got to see her, sort of. She was in an incubator and she was facing the other way. So I got to see her back. So that was super sad and disappointing because after birth, you want to have your baby with you, but it was just okay. So they told me, I had her in the morning or something, and they told me by 9 p.m. I could go visit her again. 9 hours after surgery, I could go see her again in the NICU and try to latch her on and try to breastfeed or whatever. So my nurses changed. So that 9 p.m. time came along, and I had been waiting to get to see my baby. And this new nurse said, you're not ready to get out of bed and go see. You're not ready to get into a wheelchair. Who told you could do that? And I started bawling and crying my eyes out. I was in no way trying to manipulate this nurse in any way, but I was so upset because I was so, hanging my hopes on getting to see my baby at this specific time that they told me, and I was waiting for 9 hours to go see her. And then they tell me I can't because the nurse has changed, because she has different information. So that was super sad. So I was just crying. And again, my 1.5-year-old Esther was visiting, and she was upset that I was crying. And my mother-in-law was there, and she wanted me to cut it out and stop upsetting the baby. And I'm hormonal and emotional, and I just gave birth, and I'm crying because they won't let me see my baby. And the nurse was like, wait, okay. We can make an exception. Chill out, lady. We'll get a wheelchair for you. It's going to be okay. So they took me in the wheelchair. I got to go see her and try to latch her on. I ended up having to pump tiny little bits of colostrum in little tubes, and we saved it for them to give to the baby. I had to sign paperwork. They put a tube into her stomach and she was receiving donated breast milk. Stab in the heart, you know, thankful for the people that donate breast milk, but it was sad that I didn't get to be the one that was feeding my baby. She was in NICU. So my heart goes out to people that have to do NICU for more extended than my baby did. So I started off visiting her in the wheelchair. Then I starting to walk again, and I was pushing the wheelchair like it was my walker. And I, you know, slowly was going to go visit her. Then they moved her to an NICU room that was just down the hall from me, so it wasn't as far. And I started visiting her like they limited how much I could see her. They only let me visit her like every 6 hours. And because they wanted her to rest and they wanted to monitor her. She was off the breathing machines by the time she was in the second room, the second day. But they wanted to monitor her still. She still had the feeding tube in her nose going into her stomach. And I was, you know, visiting and trying to latch her on and everything. And then after about 2.5 days, they let her come to my room, and she had the feeding tube out and she was off of all breathing stuff. So it felt like eternity, but I'm sure it's a lot longer for other people who have their kids in NICU for longer. And I got to start taking care of my baby. And then she had to pass the car seat test and everything in order to be able to go home with us. So that was so nice. Both my girls, in other words, were born at 37 weeks. Esther was born 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Deborah was born 6 pounds, 13 ounces. So now comes Joshua. I searched high and low for the best doctor. Well, there's a VBAC group, Vaginal Birth After Cesarean. There's a VBAC group on Facebook for my city. All of them say that the best doctor for vaginal birth after cesarean is Dr. Proverbs. So I was able to sign up for Dr. Proverbs, and she was one of the only doctors in Kansas City that was willing to let me try for a vaginal birth after 2 cesareans. So I was taking the low-dose aspirin for him to prevent high blood pressure. I didn't have high blood pressure in that pregnancy. I went to 10 days past his due date, and they induced me, but they couldn't induce me with Pitocin because I had scar tissue from my other 2 cesareans. If you're having a VBAC, you're limited on how you can be induced. So they used, I call it a Foley bulb. It's actually different than a Foley bulb. It's something catheter, but basically they insert a balloon, not rubber balloon, but like plastic, hard plastic balloon, that into your cervix, TMI guys, and it is connected, it has a catheter connected to fluid that is slowly but surely forcing your cervix to open. Extremely painful, but thus is childbirth. So I did dilate with him because I was forced to dilate. But I had extreme pain. They gave me some painkillers that made me loopy. I looked at the clock at one point and I was like, the hour hand and the minute hand are the same length. How are you supposed to tell the time on that clock? And then later when I was not out of it, I was like, those are definitely different lengths. I was pretty loopy at the time when under that medicine. Okay, sorry. I forgot to talk about how the what's it called? The spinal tap affected me differently for my C-section. Maybe it was because of the spinal tap. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was because of the surgery. But I would have these painful back spasms exactly at the site of the part of my back where I got the spinal tap. I would have these painful back spasms where my back would just like tense up and freeze up and like it would be like it's like getting electric shocked in your back, like plus getting hit by a hammer or something like that. Really painful, but it only lasts like 1 minute and then it goes away. So it was like, okay, all right. And that would happen maybe once a day. then later once a week, later once a month, until finally it stopped happening after several months. But that was a negative effect. And doctors and nurses tell me that's not a normal reaction to a spinal tap, so they must have hit a nerve or something. I don't know. So with Joshua, long story short, I progressed to 8 centimeters dilated, and even when they took me off the Pitocin, I was having natural contractions, but his heart rate was dropping. His heart rate was dipping every contraction. So I was concerned that he could have like an umbilical cord around his neck or something else. So I didn't want to have a stillbirth. I was more concerned a little bit than the nurse and doctor were. And I was like, guys, for real, I am fine with a C-section, even though, you know, I went through all this work and got to this stage of dilation. I had been in labor maybe 18 hours, 18, 20 hours. But I was like 8 centimeters dilated, but his heart rate was dipping every contraction. So the nurse called the doctor, and the doctor was disappointed for me, and I was not. This C-section was neither an emergency C-section nor a scheduled C-section. It was neither. It was an unplanned C-section, let's say. So that means my husband was allowed in the room. It wasn't scheduled in advance. They were able to take their time because my baby wasn't in imminent danger. That being said, there was concern. This was the largest amount of nurses I've ever seen in a C-section operation room. There were nurses in yellow and nurses in blue. The ones in blue were there for me in case because I've had 2 former C-sections, in case I lost a lot of blood and needed a blood transfusion. They had a lot of hands on deck to help me. There were a lot of nurses dressed in yellow, and those were all pediatric nurses. They were here for the baby. In case the baby came out without a heartbeat, they could help the baby, or if there was a complication or a problem or some sort of issue with the baby, they were there. So they were trying to be like nonchalant, not act like anything was wrong. And I was like, why are there blue nurses and yellow nurses? And they're like, well, once the baby's out, most of us nurses in yellow are going to disappear. We're just here to make sure baby's okay. And if baby's fine, most of us are going to go. But we're just here just to make sure that everything's fine. So praise God, he came out great. I'd been concerned because he went 10 days past his due date. I was worried that he was going to poop inside of the uterus and potentially breathe that in. And that can be toxic for the baby and cause potential death or potential, sickness or problems. And God knew that desire of my heart, because as soon as he was born, he pooped in the nurse's hand before they even weighed him. So it's funny because they weighed him and he was 1 ounce less than 9 pounds, but I think he was 9 pounds when he came out before he pooped in the nurse's hand. So he came out and he was weighed at 8 pounds, 15 ounces, and he was big and he was healthy. My husband got to hold him. I got to have him on my chest. He didn't have to go to NICU. I got to have him with me. Guys, this story is different than the other two. I have a picture of me smiling so big because I got to have him with me as they wheeled me into the recovery room. I got to latch him on and breastfeed him right away. I got to have my baby. They didn't take him away from me. Sure, he had to get the vitamin K shot and have his vitals and stuff, but they let me have my baby, guys. It was amazing. So, but one thing was, because he was a bigger baby, they were monitoring his blood sugar. So every time I breastfed him, once every couple of hours, they would come and they would have to on the heel of his foot, give him a little shot and check his blood sugar. And a couple times it was a little bit high. So with bigger babies, they want to make sure their blood sugar is great before they send him home. So after a few times of checking him, he was fine and he was good to go. So anyway, that's my story with Joshua. So now with Caleb, he's number 4. I'm still pregnant with him, 33 weeks right now. It's going to be a scheduled C-section. So I'm having him at the same hospital I had Joshua at. That's a hospital that believes in skin to skin, letting you have your baby right afterwards, not taking the baby away from the mother. And even if the baby needs like NICU help, they try to have a nurse and the incubator in the same room with the mother. So that's like so nice that this hospital is so much better. So I tried to do everything with the same hospital that I had Joshua at. I did have one vaginal birth, but I lost that baby at 17 weeks, and it was, you know, like having a small stillbirth. So I had Gabriel at that same hospital, and those nurses were so wonderful to help me in my sad time. So I have had a vaginal birth, but it was not one that I got to take home and keep. So for that reason, when I hear women complaining about vaginal birth and how painful it is and stuff, recovering from a C-section is harder from my experience. Again, I didn't have to have an episiotomy. I didn't have to, you know, I didn't have to have stitches for vaginal birth, but it's hard for me if I hear people complaining about vaginal birth or joking about it, because the one time I had a vaginal birth, I didn't get to keep the baby. I still had to do all the work, but sorry. Anyway, so this will be my last baby. I'm getting my tubes tied, removed, tubal ligation. Okay, I'll help in a minute. Yes, my love, I can help you. So anyway, this is my last baby, and I look forward to telling you the story of his birth. Let me read what you guys are saying. Okay. Amanda L. said, my son was sunny side up. Felt like he was coming out of my back. They had to lay me flat on the table for him to pop around my tailbone. I had a broken tailbone, so it was so painful. Oh my goodness. I love hearing birth stories. I miss having babies. My baby will be 9 on Christmas. Hey, Kelly. Hey, Candy. Hey, Amanda. So yeah. Yes, I did that too. The epidural did it to me. You didn't ask for a doula? If I wanted to pay for a doula, I did contact a doula when I lost a baby. But yeah, it's better to not take it if possible. I know from experience, very addictive. Yes, I just take Tylenol. So Amanda said, praying for you that this birth will be perfect. Thank you so much. I'm excited that my scheduled C-section is scheduled for 39 weeks. So I'm hoping that I can have him at 39 weeks and that everything will go well. So that's my experience with cesareans. Recovery is like coming back from the dead, but it's doable. And I look forward to telling you guys my last birth story in the future. All right. I love you guys. Talk to you later. Bye.